This video will make you a professional script writer using the Python programming language, because we will learn how to create CLI based projects using a library that supports parsing subcommands and arguments very easily, and this library even generates automatic helps for the commands and arguments that you enable in your project. And that is awesome. We are going to work with a library that is named Typer, which will allow us to execute programs like in the way that you see right now, providing subcommands and also multiple arguments to change the behavior of your script. So this is going to be cool to learn. We will show the basics of this library, and then we will develop a real scenario project, and we will add to its complexity step by step. So stay tuned and let's begin. So one of the first things that we have to do is to install the Typer library, and of course we do that with the pip CLI. So this means that we have to go ahead and say pip install Typer, and be sure to install it either on your system environment, which is the same as PyCharm, or just make a separated virtual environment if you wish to. So I'm just going to go ahead and run it, and you can see that I already installed it because I played with this tons of times already. And let's go ahead and clean the screen and show what it does. So when you install it on Windows, basically it behaves the same as Linux. It should be also installing a Typer CLI. So this means that if you type Typer, then it should be a recognized command. Although there might be an issue with Linux or Mac environments according to some issues I faced in the community. But anyway, we are not going to rely on the Typer CLI too much, and you'll see that in a minute or two. So let's go ahead and clean everything and bring in the documentation of the Typer library, and we are just going to go ahead and bring in the hello world application as it suggests. So we grab it and we paste this in here. Now we should pay attention that this function receives one parameter and has a type hint of string, and this has a special meaning to the Typer library because it enforces the program to receive an argument when you run it from the CLI. That's the magic that happens behind the scenes when you receive parameters in your functions when your project is based on the Typer library. So this means that if I go ahead and execute it like the documentation suggests me, which is Typer, and then the name of the file, in my case this is order.py run, then it is going to complain how the name argument is missing. Now this means that I have to pass in the argument right after I execute the program. So if I was to say Typer order.py run and then pass an argument of Jim, then it is going to function properly. Now you might have expected that this program would work as well if you were to execute it like the following, meaning passing the -- name equals to Jim, but that is not going to work because in the terminology of Typer, that is named as argument. But the thing that we are trying to do, passing the name and Jim, is basically passing in an option. And that is just not the same thing when you build applications with the Typer library, but this syntax is going to come into play in the near future when we write this project. Now let's also take a look how the automatic help message looks like for this project until now. So if we clean everything, and we bring in the previous command and we say -- help, this -- is actually going to work. And you can see that we have an automatic help message about how to use this program. Look how beautiful it is, alright? It shows you the arguments, what is required, what is not required, and it also shows the options. That is exactly what I was talking earlier on. You can see that in the container of arguments, you pass in things directly as the value without providing the -- whatever the name it is, and in options you have to provide it. And that is why previously I passed -- name, it did not work, because that is an option and not an argument when it comes to Typer terminology. In this section we will see how you can use Typer library to create multiple subcommands, and we will maintain a file to write as our database of our orders. And if we use the create subcommand and add a customer name, then it will add a new order, and if we use the cancel command, then it will delete the order. And of course there are tons of actions that we will add in the background which will make us understand the advanced concepts of the Typer library. Alright, so now we are going to start building the project from scratch, learning more fundamentals about the Typer library. And as you saw in the preview, we are going to simulate kind of a pizza order project, so let's see how it's going to work. We are going to start with importing the typer library as the first step, because that will also help us to execute our Python files in a traditional way, and we don't have to rely on the typer CLI anymore. And the way that this is going to work, we are going to create an instance of a typer application, and then we are just going to run the application. And it might remind you actually how Flask works, okay? That is quite similar, alright? Or Fast API, which is the same developer, by the way, of the typer library. Okay, so now we can go ahead and use typer.typer, and then this is basically how you create an application of typer. We are going to assign it to a variable that is named app, and if _name is equal to _main, then we are going to run our application like that. And in between these, we are going to write all the supported commands in our typer application. And we are going to start with the create command, which will help us to add orders in our pizza shop. So it makes sense to start with a function that we could name create, just build step by step until we have a generic function that knows to add orders. So we will start by using create, and we will receive one parameter for now, which I can name customer. It's going to be a string, and here we are going to write the logic when we execute Python name of the file create. And in the beginning, I'm just going to say a print message that will say hello customer, like that. And once we have done this, then we have to let our typer application to know that this is a supported command in this typer based project. And so that is why we have to decorate this function with a special function that is delivered inside the application here, and that's going to look like the following. I'm just going to go ahead and decorate this function with app.command, and that is how you mark your functions to be commands that will be supported. And the name of the function has a special meaning here. That is how the name of the command is going to be called, right? Now, in advance, I will be preparing one more function here that will just be a similar behavior. We will print customer, but I will name this cancel because I want to have the command ready for the time that I'm going to design the cancel order functionality. And if we do a quick test of our project until now, then let's go ahead and see how it behaves. So right now we can execute it with the Python. So order.py, and I can just say create as the subcommand here and just pass in the necessary argument, which is the customer. So it's going to be Jim, for example, and it will say hello Jim. Of course, the same thing will happen here if I change it to cancel, like the following. And you can pass in any name you want here, of course, for both of the comments. Now, one of the confusing parts about the typer library is a special behavior when a project has more than one command, meaning 2 or more. Notice how, if I'm going to delete one of the functions here, let's comment these out, and I'm going to bring in my terminal and I'm going to go ahead and say create Jim, that is not going to work anymore. And that is intentional, because when you only have one command on your project, it doesn't really make sense to use subcommands. And that is why the typer library saves you time by mentioning the subcommand, so you can directly mention the arguments of the only supported command, which is create. So that might be a little bit confusing part to understand about the typer library, but when you really absorb it, it totally makes sense, right? Because you have only one command, why do we have to mention the subcommand of create here? So you can just run this program right now in that way, only mentioning the customer argument, which is Jim or any other name, and you are good to go. So back to our Python file here, I'm just going to uncomment these lines because we commented these out to show something about the typer library, and I'm going to prepare the process of writing to the CSV file. So first thing, you'd like to have a variable that maintains the information about which file we are writing to, so we can go ahead and use orders file equals to orders.csv, which is our file. And it is also a great idea separating the writing process from the create command. So we'll have a simple function without the decorator that will say def write orders, and it will just receive a dictionary as a parameter because data represents the order data. We will just pass in dictionary, and then we will prepare the writing process here. And that is actually going to be one order to write, so it makes sense to deleting the s from the end. And at first, I'm going to use the with open function, which will be the way to connect to your files. So I will just go ahead and use with open, and I will pass in orders file as my file name, orders file, and I will use append mode, all right, because I'd like to append line by line for each time that I create an order. And then I'm just going to go ahead and use as if, and down below we'd like to have a special library that supports writing in an easy way to a CSV file. So we are just going to go ahead and import this library right here, import CSV like that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say inside the open, by the way, that is a context manager, I'm going to go ahead and use CSV writer, and that's going to be equal to CSV.dictionary writer, which is written in that way. And that is a special class inside the CSV library which knows to take in a dictionary and automatically to write the values of this dictionary as a row. That is a very useful in class here. So I will just instantiate it and pass in my file object like that. And I'd also like to pass in the field names because this class requires to have the field names of the CSV. And if you remember, we do have our field names in our CSV file already. So we have two options here. We could either read the first file of this file, or we could just have a separated list in our project. Let's make it easier for now for us and go ahead and maintain something like field names, and we will just have a list with our fields. Of course, we need to use double quotes in between each of these. So I will quickly do that here. Okay, so now that we have this, then we can pass in the field names as an additional argument to the class. So we will say f and then field names equals to field names like the following. And now that we have this, then we'd like to go ahead and write to the CSV file, and we know that we already received the dictionary of the information about the order as a parameter. So we could just simply say CSV writer dot write row, and we are going to pass in the data like that, and that's it. That's the perfect function for writing a new row which is going to be comma separated to a CSV file. So we have completed this function. Now it's about time to call it from our create command. So we can go ahead and call it like the following. It doesn't return anything yet, so I just call this directly, and I'm going to say data is equal to an empty dictionary, and I'm going to start preparing my data that I like to pass here. So first things first, we'd like to say that the customer is actually the customer that we have here on our hand. So we are just going to pass this, and we also like to pass in size. And as the size, currently I'm going to just say medium size, all right? In the future, we will see how we can use optional arguments. And the last key value pair will be the order time, okay? So it's also a great idea to make it a bit more realistic, capturing the current time and just pass it as a datetime string. And datetime is actually the library that we use in Python to have date objects, datetime objects. So we are going to import this library, and I do have a tutorial that I released recently about datetime. If you want to watch it, make sure to go to the link to the description if you want to have a look at. So I will just say here import datetime, and let's go back to our create command function. And actually I'm going to do some actions in the first line of our function, and then I'm going to call methods that will be here. So it looks like the following. Capturing the current time is actually like this. So we refer to the datetime library, we go inside another submodule, and then we use the now method, which returns us a datetime object in a special format that includes the current hour, minute, and milliseconds, and of course the year, date, and the day in the month. All right. So now that we have this, then we'd like to mention that we'd only like to capture the current time. And the format of this will be like this. So if now it is 7 p.m., then we'd only like to capture this time. We are not interested in seconds, something like that. We only like the hours or minutes. So it is going to look like this. We are just going to override the current variable here, and we are just going to say that current is equal to an f string, and then I will refer to the current that is from here. And actually, let's change the variable name of this to current time, okay? And then I will just use colon, and then I will use special formatting inside these f strings. Notice how I'm inside the curly brackets. I'm using the percentage sign, and I refer to the hour, capital H. Then I say colon, and then I refer to the minutes. So this will be capital M with the percentage sign as well. So this is how the following line looks like, and it will capture the current time in this format, which I wrote earlier. It makes sense to delete it. And then I'm just going to pass this in as the value for the order time. And there we go, we have everything we need, all right? So now it's a good time to test ourselves. We are going to bring in our terminal, and we are just going to delete everything, and let's simulate a new order. We are just going to go ahead and say python order.py create, and remember that we only have to pass in the customer name. So let's use a name like John, and you can see that we receive hello John. And it could have been also nicer to receive another message at the end when the order is actually added to the database. So we are going to do that in a second, but let's see if the orders.csv file has been changed. And you can see that the order has been added. Now notice how it added here 2 new lines, and that happens because we do have a method that opens an interaction with a file, appends to a new file, and also we do have the dict writer, which is also another component that writes to a file and it uses a new line. So a good way that I like to overcome this is just say here that don't do anything in new line, alright? So just use empty string so that it will jump only once and not twice. Notice how we do have 2 blank lines here. And the next time it just won't happen, okay? So if I call this again and I pass in Mike, then you can see that after writing here, it only created 1 new empty line, which is the behavior that we want. And just to test this one final time here, we could go ahead and say Jim. And that happened because I did not leave it with a blank line before. So I'm just going to leave the file like that. Make sure to leave that 1 empty line at the end. And from now on, you don't really have to edit the orders.csv file manually. Okay, so now that we have reached so far, let's understand some more advanced concepts about the typer library by adding more functionalities. Now, it could have been nicer if when we create an order, we could have a default size value, and if the user desires to change it from the CLI, then he can just go ahead and change it. So the way that we can do this is actually by receiving optional arguments. And the way that these work is quite simple. You just go ahead and create an additional parameter that has a default value, and then it has to be passed in with the syntax of dash dash like that in the CLI, of course, okay? So let's see an example of this. So in a realistic situation, it is a great idea to receive another parameter that is just called size, and it is going to be a string as well, but I'm going to give it a default value of medium. Okay, and before we show how it works in the CLI, let's quickly change this to medium, of course, I mean to the size variable, and then we could see how it behaves in the CLI, alright? So if we bring our terminal here, we could go ahead and say python order.py create, and we could pass in a random name like Adam, and it will create the order. But if we would like to pass in the size, then check out how we should do it. So if we use the dash dash help after the create, then you can see that we have option of size. So this means that we could pass dash dash size equals to whatever size we'd like. So I will bring in the previous command and I will say size equals to large. And let's go ahead and use a different name here like Michael. So you can see that if I'm going to my CSV file, then you can see that this is large here. So that is a good behavior that you want to keep in your mind when you work with the typer library. Okay, so now we are in full screen in PyCharm. After adding the optional argument, let's see how we can add progress bars with the library that is also installed when we install the typer library. Now, when we install the typer library, I actually kept the logs here, and you can see that it also installed a library that is called rich. And this library includes tons of nice beautiful visualizations when you create programs that are user friendly. So you can use this to just make your programs nicer. And one of the things that it supports is creating a progress bar. So we are going to just go ahead and use it. So from reach.progress, we are going to use the track function, which will help us to create easily a progress bar. Now, we don't really have a large processing data that will really make this progress bar realistic enough, but we are just going to show how you can do it. So maybe if you have really something heavy to process, then you can really use progress bar and it will be like a real progress bar, because writing a single line to a file probably takes less than a millisecond. So it will be just rapidly fast, okay? So down here inside the create function, I'm going to call the track function right here. But when we call the track function, it actually expects to be within a for loop, so that it will know how to increase the values from 0 to 100 when the progress bar starts progressing. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a for loop, and I'm using underscore because I'm not really going to refer to the iterated value. I'm just going to go ahead and say in track, the first function is just a sequence. What is the action that you'd like to do in the processing of progress bar? So I'm just going to say just process one time, okay? And we will see what other arguments it supports, okay? So right here, I'm just going to tell it, okay, sleep 2 seconds before you complete from 0 to 100, and we will see the progress bar really in work, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and say time.sleep, and let's sleep 2 seconds. Now notice how we really did not import the time library earlier on, so you have to go here and import it. Since I used auto completion, then PyCharm did this automatically for me. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see this in action. So if we bring our terminal and we switch to that tab, we clean everything, and I'm just going to make another order here. It should be order.py create, and I will just say mark. And you can see that the progress bar works, but it could have been nicer if it could be smoother and we could not only see the values from 0 to 100. So the way that we can do this is actually increasing the sequence of range to 100. So it thinks that it has 100 things to process, and we could sleep much lesser time. We could say 0.001, something like that. And if we try this again, then you can see that it looks a bit better, and also we'd not like to really hang on too much, okay? And there is also a nice option in the track function that you can go ahead and say description, and we could have a nice emoji of pizza here, and then we could say something like adding your order, and it's going to look much nicer. And right after the order has been processed, you could print one final line that will say your order has been written, something like that, okay? And if we try this again, then you can see that it has a description that is nice, and then we also have the final print line, which looks much nicer than before. Alright, so there are other important things to know about the typer library before you go ahead and write your own programs. Just critical features that it has that you are going to benefit from for sure. So when you write a function, you probably saw how it is a best practice to write a doc string using this syntax, okay, with the triple double quotes. So between here, let me actually remove these. If you go ahead and start your doc string from here, then it is going to be visualized very user-friendly in the help page when you want to receive help about the create command. So let's show an example of that. So I'm just going to write here a simple thing like create a pizza order, and I'm going to go on a new line, and I'm going to say examples, and I'm going to provide a couple of examples how to use it. I'm going to go ahead and say python order.py create, and then I'm just going to say name, which is just a placeholder for the customer, and then I will just say size, your size, something like that. And there you go, you have an example how you can use it, okay? So if we can actually duplicate this and make the user understand that he could create an order in this way as well. And if we bring our terminal back here and we try to say python order.py create dash dash help, then you can see that it is printed nice here. And there's actually no enter here, so that's why these are in the same line. So I'm just going to make a new line. You can see that now it looks perfect. It shows me creates a pizza order, and then there are examples. So that is quite nice that the docstring is included inside the help page of the command. And another thing that I really like in the typer library is the fact that you can control what happens if there are missing arguments. So right now, if I'm going to say order.py create and I won't provide any argument, then it will display me this message. But maybe I'd like to receive the help page automatically when I make mistakes. So what you can do in that case, you can go to the command decorator and you can say no args is help equals to true, and then it will do the trick for you. So if I run this again, then you can see that instead throwing me an error message, then it shows me what I have to do to make it a successful execution in the next time. So that's also one more thing that I really like in the typer library. Okay, so now let's focus on the other side of our application, and I'm going to show how the typer library includes management of critical actions in your CLI programs. Now, deleting a line from a file might be an action that you'd like to confirm twice with a user, and so the typer library has some nice built-in functions that will allow you to manage these quite easily. Now, I'm not really going to develop the functionality of actually deleting the line from the CSV file, but thanks to the cancel option we added, we could simulate how the typer library has some nice built-in features so that you will know how to manage critical actions in your projects. So let's see one of these. So I'm going to use the typer.confirm functionality, which is just like an input function that is smart, that knows to handle the yes or no response from the user. So this means that it knows to handle the Y and the N automatically, and it knows what to do whether if we press Y or N quite dynamically, and that is nice. So let's show how it works. I'm going to assign this to a variable called confirm, and here I'm going to include the question that I like to ask. Are you sure you would like to cancel? Okay, something like that. And then I could go ahead and say, if not confirm, then we could simply say print action aborted. Not only that, but the typer library has a built-in abort class that will also make another nice visualization of aborting the action. So we could go ahead and use here raise typer.abort. And of course, this will ensure that nothing will happen right after this line arrives because we raise something here, okay? And in other case, we could just say, if we don't hit the raise and we don't hit basically the not confirm, then we can do the action. We could say preparing the cancellation, okay? Something like that. Okay, so now let's see how it works in action. So I'm going to bring in our terminal here, and I'm just going to go ahead and say python order.py cancel, and then let's say that we'd like to cancel Mike's order. We sure had Mike in this project. Okay, so you can see that it automatically adds the Y and the N. It does this automatically. If I press on N, you can see that it prints this aborted. I did not do that. The abort class, the abort exception that is built in, did this for us. Okay, and if we press here Y, let's bring the terminal here, then you can see that it jumped into preparing the cancellation. Now it also handles, of course, capital Y or capital N, and I also think that it knows handling more positive or more negative values rather than Y's and N's. Okay, so that is quite nice thing that you want to mix up with your projects when you have critical actions that you want to allow to your users with the typer library. Okay, so let's wrap this video. I think you have everything that you need for a perfect CLI project in Python. And so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section. And also, if you enjoyed it here, hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel, and I will see you very soon.